gosh, I don't even know what your title is. He runs the interactive team at The Guardian. I've known him for many years, and the last time we were together, I walked out on a substantial bar tab, so I owe him a lot. He's also responsible for some of the amazing interactive graphics you see across the Guardian website. And we'll be over here shortly.
No expert with microphones, but okay, this seems to be on the last slide rather than the first one, so that might be a bit confusing to people. Can we put it to the first slide?
Yeah, you can use the left arrow.
Yeah, but I'll just have to go through the entire deck to get there. I mean, people can watch it backwards if they want, but all right. Okay. Right. Hi, everyone. So I'm here today from The Guardian in London. And what I wanted to do, I'm actually going to just quickly say that I feel very lucky to have been sort of blessed with a surname that begins with D, because it means that in the alphabetical order, I've now come after Brian and Alberto, who are actually kind of, I guess, sort of like covering a lot of the issues which this work that I'm going to show you touches upon as well. But I'm probably not going to talk so much about the sort of more philosophical aspects of it. I'll just show you the work, and I'll talk about three categories of sort of telling stories with data. So the first thing is really plotting a path through events. And more to the point, I think it sort of coincides with the idea that you can actually make a visualization from the raw data directly. And sometimes that data has a sort of emotional power in its own right. So in this case, when we were covering the first WikiLeaks war log dump, which was Afghan IED attacks, a discussion was had editorially. Julian Assange expressed a preference to give people something like a video. But giving people just a simple playback of many, many thousands of events in space and time was only sort of one part of telling the story. We wanted people to also be able to stop at any point on that timeline, add filters, zoom into the map, and actually get to the point where you could click on any single one of those individual events and find out the details of it. So what we've got there is hopefully an encapsulation of some of the things that Alberto was talking about. And here down the bottom, we've got this line chart which shows you the volume of attacks over time, so you get a sort of sense that it's ramping up in addition to what's happening here in the chart. And we've also got a bit of an annotation layer as well there. And I think the idea of an annotation layer is one of the places where the kind of editorial voice really comes out. So I want to sort of move on from this to a second example, which is, I think, characteristic of something a little bit different. We began a project with the World Cup in 2010. And I had this kind of notion in my head that I wanted to get the feeling of the roar of the crowd passing through Twitter. So we built this interactive here, which I'm not sure how well you can see because the kind of gray doesn't work so well. But basically, we took a recording of all the tweets that occurred in every match. Every minute of every match, we figured out what the most popular words were. And then we created a playback where 90 minutes of a football game were turned into sort of 90 seconds of flying balls. And as these balls fly around, the places where kind of human energy is most present become reflected in the activity of the ball. So there's something about the way that data itself is a record of something. But to make that record speak to people, sometimes you have to bring it to life. Now that alone is not the whole story. What we've got here is a follow-up project which we put together around about the time last year where the Murdoch family was answering political questions. And what you can see here is the volume at the start of the day is quite pronounced. People are quite interested in what the Murdochs are going to say, and it kind of gradually starts to tail off because they're fending off all the questions that they're being posed quite effectively. So as this sort of timeline progresses, you actually see that the words here start to drift away from what they're talking about in court because people are getting bored. And And then what we've added there on the left is a sort of a sense of editorial annotation. We've basically put in a kind of set of key moments that our editors have picked out. But here's the good bit. Here's a sort of money shot. And what I think is really important to just sort of note at this stage is that it's not only adding these annotations on the left-hand side that kind of makes this piece work. It's the fact that A, we were lucky enough to be recording at the right time, and B, we were then able to sort of make a kind of editorial judgment as to exactly where it should start and end. And so that's almost a bit like editing video at that point. So if you imagine that data is a kind of raw material, at the point where you're bringing it to life, you have to exercise the kind of editorial sense in terms of which bits of that videotape, which bits of that recording are most interesting to people. So I want to talk about open data because I think that the project which is closest to my heart right now is an attempt to start making some open tools for working with open data. And the genesis of the sort of example that we've built to show off these tools starts with something that happened a couple of years ago. The government in the UK is increasingly committed to transparency. And in order to give people this sense of transparency, they put all of their spending information into a set of PDF documents. So anyone that's actually sort of worked with trying to scrape data or you know, kind of fetch data in those circumstances knows that a PDF is actually almost a purposely obscure way of making that document available. But fortunately, our data blog team did the kind of grunt work required to get all that out of the PDF into a spreadsheet format, which is then shared on the web. Now, our graphics team were able to do something with that, which I think kind of is a really good example of how print graphics differ from online graphics. So what you can do in print is you can give a center spread to something like this, and you've got an enormous amount of kind of, I can't remember what Tufty calls it, something like ink space. But basically, you've got an enormous amount of detail that wouldn't actually work if you tried to put it online, all in one visual field. I think what Alberto was saying, which is really important, is the fact that when you create something online and you create an interactive interface, you can make that interface work in a kind of incremental way. So people can move through and explore, perhaps sometimes in a guided way, and not necessarily have to deal with everything at once. So this is what we ended up putting online. It's basically something we call the spending challenge. And the idea here is that you can actually decide which cuts you want to make yourself. And you can go, you see a tree map here which gives you an overview of the different departmental spending, but you can go into any of these departments and you can actually sort of see a rather kind of editorialized list of possible cuts. And then you can make a blanket cut here because you really don't like the idea that we spend so much money on defense, so you cut half of that. And you go on and you go on. And what we also did for this project, which I think is actually a pretty useful thing for us to sort of revisit in the future, is we made it possible for people to share their cuts with others. So we basically set a very simple kind of like encoding system that put all people's choices into a URL, which they could then you know, kind of take this armchair economist pose and share with all their friends and say, here's how I would solve the budget problem. And we opened up, this is the way you do it sort of down here, we opened up comments on this page. And what we found was that this actually triggered a debate. The ability to point people in at your kind of vision is a good way to stimulate debate. And I think this idea of creating a tool like this, which is almost a sort of like an open-ended tool, it's something where you can kind of find your own path through the data, and then you can share that. And I think that's potentially an interesting way that you can start to make these things work in the context of a public website, because you can basically invite people into a discussion. And anyway, getting to the kind of most interesting fact, 9 times out of 10, people solved the 49 billion deficit by cutting Scotland, which is about 52 billion. So this brings me on to the sort of main thing that I wanted to highlight today, which is a project that we've just started development on in January. It's called the MISO project. And basically what we're doing here is we're using some money from the Gates Foundation to develop a set of open source tools. And what those tools will hopefully do is enable us to get to a stage where when we create an interactive piece, we'll no longer just be publishing it up in a way that sort of preserves our dignity, as the chap was saying earlier. We actually want to make the kind of code and the data that make the piece work public. And we want that to be a start of a conversation. So the idea with MISO is that we'll start using a standard set of tools to build all of our work, which we're also sharing with people, so that anytime you see, in this case, we did a kind of remake of the Cabinet Office spending graphic using the new tools. And anytime you see a piece, and assuming that everybody keeps to their New Year's resolution of learning to code this year, you can actually open that piece up and start making your own version of it. So, obviously, if you don't live in the UK, you might have other spending office data to look at. And for that reason, I think that this is a sort of set of tools which could be useful to a kind of wider community, because the more this data is opened up and surrounds us, the more we need a way of engaging people in conversation about what that data means. So, if you want to follow along with the project, we've got a sort of Twitter thing here, the MISO project, and we'll be sort of sending updates as we put these libraries out throughout the year.